Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so excited that everyone here is interested in learning more about voice AI and learning about how you can drive this type of innovation in your organizations. So today we're joined by Millie from Brighte and Neil from Curious Thing AI and in partnership with Vonage. And we're going to be sharing some of our experiences around our most successful applications of voice AI across different organizations. So today we hope that everyone comes away with some really valuable and practical insights to start exploring what's going to be possible in your own customer journeys going from here. In the spirit of reconciliation, Curious Thing AI acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I am very excited to introduce you to our panel today and also to share some more background about some of our experiences in this space. So to start, my name is Emma Wiltshire and I'm from our customer success team here at Curious Thing AI. In my role, I work very closely with all of our customers to understand their current customer journeys and where we can find the best opportunities to create these conversations with their customers using voice AI. I absolutely love working hands-on with our customers and working together to create really meaningful and unique experiences using Curious Things technology. And of course, I'm joined by our two fantastic speakers. So I'll pass over to Neil and then Millie to introduce themselves as well.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everybody. My name's Tennille Moisel. I have been working in customer experience, specifically around contact centres for over 20 years now. I am a fairly new person to Curious Thing. I've been working here for about 4 months or so after being a customer of Curious Things for a number of years. So I'm really focused on how to, or my career has been focused on how to maximise and optimise the customer experience through customer journeys. And I've got a really keen interest in CX measurements. So how we measure CX and how that's sort of evolving and changing over time. I'll hand over to Millie.
Awesome, thanks Tennille. So my name's Millie McClary and I'm the support manager at Brighte. I look after the customer support team and the settlements team. And I'm going to talk a bit later about how we launched with Curious Thing and all the great benefits we've had from it so far. But I'll tell you a bit about Brighte. So Brighte's mission is to make every home sustainable. We believe that sustainable homes can be both comfortable and affordable without compromise. We're a renewable energy platform that offers fast, easy and streamlined ways to help households transition to an electrified world.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Millie. So in today's agenda, we're going to be going through a lot of topics around voice AI, of course. So to start off, we're going to learn about what voice AI is and what that means as a new engagement channel for your customers. Then we're going to speak about some of the opportunities to start introducing voice AI into your customer journey and things to keep in mind for really high customer engagement, depending on consumers' perceptions around interacting with an AI. Then we're going to hear from Millie about Brighte's experience using voice AI to drive value for both their customers and their organization. And then we'll wrap up by talking about some of the legitimacy issues around outbound calls like robo or spam calls, for example, and how AI voice calls can address some of those. At the end of the session, we'll also have time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section below. And if you have any thoughts, we'd love to hear them in the chat as well. So before we get started into the content of today, I'm just going to launch a poll here. And we would love if everyone attending could let us know what conversational AI tools you currently use. And then we'll come back to this later on in today's session. So for now, I'd love to pass over to Tennille to start our conversation around voice AI.
Thanks so much, Emma. Thanks for that. I'm really excited to see what everybody sort of says about that as well, because I think and I think a lot of people have had that sort of experience, whether it's firsthand or second and third hand, with things like robocalls. And I hope today we really work to dispel some of those myths and get people excited about what voice AI and conversational voice AI can do. So to start off with, we think of AI as the newest member of your contact or customer contact team. If you think about all the different channels that people have to make a connection or to connect with your organisation, AI and voice AI is one of those channels. And for us, it sits alongside the traditional call centre with your humans at the other end, as well as your other channels like chat, like email, like SMS. But I guess one of the greatest things about voice AI is we're talking about a channel that can actually handle thousands of concurrent interactions and providing consistent information. It retains process integrity and it generates higher response rates than email and SMS. So voice AI is able to navigate and engage with customers over a phone call, and it allows us to model the aspects of conversation that are more human-like and build those into the call. It's ideal for timely, proactive engagement. If you think about all of those prompts that we send out to customers, whether intentional or unintentional, our conversations can actually preempt some of that need for customers to actually call in once they've got a problem and they're trying to navigate the resolution of that problem themselves. So if you think about things like bill reminders that get sent out via snail mail and that time lag that sits in there, things like annual price reviews that most organisations across a number of industries actually have, and customers can get a little bit anxious to hear what that's going to look like before you've had a chance to get out to them, and credit card expiry updates and those sorts of things. There's lots of opportunity in there. So conversational AI is also listening. So it's collecting your customer feedback, it's mining or allowing you to then mine that for insights. And that's a critical aspect to the solution that Curious Thing provides. So thinking about why we would use it, there's three main categories that we look at here. And I think one of the biggest things that we sort of really advocate for at Curious Thing is that the world's not quite ready, or customers are not quite ready for AI on every single interaction. So we look at where it's best served. And there's a large percentage of calls that are really ready for voice AI. And the benefits that we see, or the reasons that people will actually choose to use voice AI, fall into these categories. So you're looking at increased capacity. So this is scalable technology we're talking about. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It can actually manage thousands of concurrent interactions or conversations, which can actually really help you minimizing recruitment, training, and proficiency building time in traditional channels. We talk about increasing or enhancing engagement. So rather than waiting for your customers to reach out with a problem, this is an opportunity to engage with them more frequently and actually with purpose. So thinking about what those interactions are that could actually really add value to your customers, as opposed to what is critical and that bare minimum that we see a lot of organisations providing. And the final one there, which makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, is about reducing costs. So we've seen AI deliver as low as 10% of human effort, but definitely we see a lot of cost reduction benefits being achieved there. So coming through in terms of the value, the overall value, we look at that in a couple of different categories here. So the first one is looking at increased opportunities to engage and re-engage with customers. So where cost and resource can be a barrier for service delivery, AI can actually facilitate a lower cost alternative. It can replace low cost and low engagement channels like SMS and email, or it can actually be augmented with those to actually enhance the overall engagement value that it's adding. The other area we look at is, in terms of value, is that critical information delivery. So when we build out conversations, we take a lot of time to map out what those critical data collection points are, what those critical decision points are, and we design the navigation so that it can actually balance out the customer expectation and the business requirements. So we're not sort of getting sidetracked and forgetting critical pieces of information, and we're not divulging information until we've actually passed through gateways and that sort of thing. And then the last one there is again around feedback and insights. We all know in the customer world that we're always trying to understand what customers really feel, and mining those for insights so that we can be adding value and improving products and services and that sort of thing. Great benefit or great piece of value that voice AI cannot actually offer is it's listening and it's capturing that feedback. Our AI can actually be designed to prompt for more information if we don't feel that we really understand or we've got enough information about a particular decision point. And those conversations are converted into data immediately. So where traditional contact centres, for example, might have huge teams looking at, quality, compliance and that sort of thing and listening to calls, this is actually converting to data immediately, so that your compliance teams and your innovation teams are absolutely able to mine those conversations immediately. Thinking about the customer journey, and I know most organisations have spent time. I certainly know that in my career consulting, I've spent a lot of time with organisations who spent millions, sometimes of dollars, mapping out their customer journeys and trying to work out how to maximise each one of these touch points. Thinking about that journey, traditionally it's broken into 3 sort of phases, I guess. So thinking about that sales or that acquisition sort of beginning of the relationship, that time when you're actually servicing a customer, so that when they're actually a customer, and then thinking about how to renew or retain them. Once you've actually identified those touch points that are relevant to each of those stages and phases, it's sort of time to actually get a bit creative about the way that you think about those interactions. So could you avoid forcing your customers to wait for a problem and for your customers to actually be the driver of a resolution? And we really see that in terms of how we onboard customers, how we resolve and notify customers of outcomes of particular questions. And even in terms of how we manage things like appointment setting and appointment booking and rescheduling those things. There's some interactions that you could accelerate a critical process. So think about that onboarding process. Think about making payments and renewals and those sorts of things. Is there something in there that you could actually be prompting your customers that is actually going to free up or avoid further interactions down the track? And could you proactively set some customer expectations with a resolution that is likely to take longer than expected? So rather than waiting again for your customer to sort of reach out and say what's happening, is there a way for you to actually be ahead of that and reset an expectation to keep them in the loop? Overall, I think looking at where AI can actually fit into that customer journey, there's a couple of prompts that we can sort of go through. And I guess this is where I kind of challenge people out there to really think about the endless opportunities. And we certainly see that there are endless opportunities. So where in your customer journey could you be proactive? What kind of value adding interactions could you add? So think about things that potentially have sort of come up as ideas in your organisation, but they don't get implemented because they're not seen as critical, or they'd be disruptive to BAU based on resource allocation and that sort of thing. What are you currently using SMS and email for? And do you think that you'd like to improve those engagement rates? Because we certainly see that voice AI delivers a much higher interaction and contact rate there. Do you have interactions that you are using those low value technologies for, but you think you could actually integrate or augment those and actually leverage voice AI as part of that process? So for example, could you follow up an SMS or email that hasn't been responded to with a voice AI call or vice versa? And the other area that we see a lot of opportunity in is thinking about the administrative aspects or tasks that form part of a broader customer engagement. So what are the processes that we mandate customer engagement teams to facilitate during a call that actually have got nothing to do with the customer's intention? So a customer might be ringing up to talk about the delivery of a product or service, but you're worrying about setting up their account because they haven't quite been onboarded properly and those sorts of things. So there's real opportunity there in thinking about that onboarding process and whether we can strip out some of that admin activity so that when customers are calling, our humans are actually available to problem solve and deliver against what the customer's expecting, as opposed to kind of waylaying them around admin tasks and that sort of thing. So just some things to think about, and certainly something that we really enjoy talking to people about in terms of their customer journeys and where voice AI could actually add value. Thanks, Emma.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jamil. And it's also great timing. So looking at the poll, we can see that 67% of the audience has used neither chatbots or voice assistants before in their current customer journey. 17% have used chatbots before, and 17% have use both voice assistants and chatbots. So this is a great opportunity to start thinking about throughout your customer journey, where some of these points that some of this technology could be adding real value for your customers. So for this next section, I'm very excited to share some of these insights because this is looking at what Australian consumer preferences are around interacting with a voice AI. So in December last year, Curious Thing commissioned a survey of over 1,000 Australians to understand what are people's thoughts, feelings, and perceptions around AI assistants. And so the question that was posed here is, which of these conversations would you feel the most comfortable having with an AI assistant over the phone? And so what's really powerful about looking at this information here is that we can start to understand that these are the best places to look at introducing AI into your customer journey, because we know that it adds value to the customer in that point of the interaction. So one of Curious Things' guiding principles is that any campaign or AI call that we do must be customer centric. We want to make sure that it's adding value for them, they're comfortable with this type of conversation, and that at the end of the call, they've had a better experience than if they were using another channel or even speaking to a human in some cases. And so the next part of this survey that we were looking at is looking at how consumers feel about voice AI versus other channels. And so we can see some really great correlations between the types of conversations we can have with the benefits that come around from using a voice AI assistant. So we saw that 60% of respondents believe that an AI assistant can resolve their inquiries rather than an SMS or email. And the great thing about having these initial interactions with customers over the phone with an AI assistant is that you could resolve 80 to 90% of the inquiries, for example, and then for the last remaining customers that actually do need that extra support, that extra help, have some other technical difficulty, you can then transfer them through to a person or link them to the right information that they need at that point. And this way, it means that every person you can have more conversations with all of your customers more often, serve them at the right point in that customer journey. And then for the people that need the extra support, you can have your team and your resources available to support them. The second item here is looking at consumers' preference around the engagement of the types of conversations. So we see that half of the respondents prefer speaking to an AI assistant that sounds like a human, so long as they know that they're speaking to an assistant. So what's great about our AI calls is that we can make them really engaging and personal. You can make them fun, give the AI a personality, and have a really wonderful human-like back and forth conversation. People are comfortable with this as long as you know that you're speaking to an AI, you have that expectation set. But it means that you can have a much more engaging and enjoyable interaction with an AI than you would if you just were to get an SMS, for example, with the same information. So this is what we find really powerful about being able to have this two-way interaction with people in a scalable and consistent way. And the last section here is just highlighting on the top 3 conversations that we saw before about what people prefer to have as conversations with an AI assistant. So if you were to look at each of these examples as a conversation that you could have with an assistant, the benefits that come are related to the scale of the conversations that you're having, and then also the insights you're getting out of them. So in the example of appointment reminders and confirmations, a lot of our customers find that it's really helpful to have these, any kind of important information relay or appointment reminders or confirming information. If it's at a really critical point of the customer journey, it's very helpful to have it over the AI because people are much more likely to pick up a phone call and have a 1 minute, 2 minute conversation than responding to an email, for example. So it's very low effort. And again, if they need more support, we can always transfer them through to someone, send them an SMS link with more information to support them at the right time in that journey. And the second conversation I'd like to talk about is the special offers and discounts. So this is a very popular strategy that we use, especially for any feedback surveys that we do with our customers. So if you were to imagine, for example, that you are launching a new product or you have a new service available for your customers, using an AI call to, first of all, communicate the new product information to them and have a survey to understand what are their feedback, what are their thoughts about the experience with their company or with that particular product, and then also offer them a special offer and discount to incentivize them to actually go back and engage with that new product or that new part of your business. And what we love about doing feedback and survey campaigns over voice is that it is such low effort for customers to be able to respond over the phone. So if I was to ask a customer, we'd love to hear honest feedback. How have you actually found working with our company so far? The amount of effort for someone to give you a really honest, front of mind and in-depth response is far less effort for them than responding in a web form or an email, for example. And so for you, it means that any of these conversations that you're having, you're collecting these really in-depth insights at scale for your customers, so that if there's an individual customer you need to focus on, you can do that immediately. And then also you can see the high-level trends about where you should be focusing on improving the customer experience and your customer journey overall. So I think that all of these points come together to really give you a nice starting point to see what kind of conversations you might want to have with the AI. So now I think this is a great opportunity for us to show you what an example of an AI call might be. So I'll ask Tennille to play a demo call. So this is a demo call between one of our team members, Constantine, and a demo company called Good Finance.
Hello, Constantine. My name is Cash, the AI support team member here at Good Finance. I have a couple of quick questions about your new application with us. Before I start, can I check that I'm speaking with Constantine Condas? Is that right?
Yes, that's me.
Great. First things first. We wanted to welcome you to Good Finance. Let me quickly introduce you to our CEO, Erica, who wanted to say a few words.
Hi, Erica Smith here. As the CEO of Good Finance, I am so grateful to you for making the switch to us. Every transaction you make now helps us to support underserved communities. It's the start of something big, and we're so excited to have you on board. Back to you, Cash.
Thanks, Erica. Now, Constantine, I need to check just two things with you today. First up, we sent you your contract information by email, along with your digital card. Have you received that email?
Yes, I got that yesterday, thanks.
Great, thank you. Next, we want to keep you in touch with the causes we support that most matter to you. Which areas are you most passionate about?
It was really the Indigenous literacy support that got my interest. I'd love to hear more about that, and also anything in animal welfare or wildlife conservation.
Excellent. We'll make note and we'll send you relevant updates, as well as major announcements. I'll also shoot you an SMS now with a link to where you can find all our campaign updates when you have time to browse. So that's all I needed to check with you today. Do you have any other queries about your Good Finance account that you need to speak with my human colleagues about?
I was actually interested in getting a physical card as well as the digital card. Is that possible?
This sounds like something one of our fantastic humans would be able to help with. Let me put you through. Thanks for chatting with me. Hold the line, please.
Wonderful. So that's an example of a demo call with our AI, and it's a really great example of all the types of questions that you can have in the call. So of course you can personalize it with a message from the CEO, from a spokesperson at the company. You can ask survey questions, open-ended, closed questions, and give the right information and ask the right questions throughout that conversation. And so I'll jump back over to our slides now. And just a reminder that if anyone has any questions, especially because we're about to hear from Millie, please drop them into the Q&A, and then we can answer any questions for Millie and also at the end of today's session. So I'll pass over to you now.
Thanks, Emma. I'll just recap. My name's Millie McClary and I'm support manager at Brighte. Yeah, so I'm going to start. I didn't have a lot of experience using AI previous to working with Curious Thing, but I had it as a customer, had some poor experiences with AI where I was just super frustrated. I just continually say, can I speak to a human? And one in particular was through an IVR when I called a company and it was an AI and it just kind of kept looping me around and it was so frustrating and I just wanted to speak to someone and it wouldn't let me. However, like my goal when I started with Curious Thing AI was to get the best experience we could for our customers while using AI. So we engaged with Curious Thing in November last year, and we've had some pretty exciting outcomes since then. One of our values at Brighte is actually be human. You might be able to see it on my screen somewhere. I'm not sure which one it is. But therefore we did have a lot of internal pushback that we're going to start using a robot and that would just completely undermine our value of be human. So then, today I'm going to talk you through some of the challenges we faced, how we got the team on board, and then the great results we've seen since then. So in October last year, we went through the process of hiring 2 temp workers last minute because we had a urgent gap that came up that we needed to start making outbound welcome calls to our customers. So we hired these agents, we trained them, we set up new tracking systems, new phone lines, and started making the phone calls. We only got a connection rate of 30%, so meaning only 30% of customers would actually pick up the phone call that we made from a human. Of those people, some people did say they were busy or that they didn't want to speak to us at that stage. And even when the customer did pick up and did want to speak to us, then we had to manually take the notes, tag the calls by the type of outcome that happened, and then it would have to go to another team to look at. So it was quite a long process, and it wasn't super successful considering we were only getting 30% of people answering calls. We were only getting through 400 calls a week of one attempt to each customer, and we needed to get through over 1,000. It wasn't a super exciting task for these agents to be doing the same thing and saying the same thing over and over, just following the same script. And on top of that, one of the agents left after only being with us for 3 or 4 weeks for some other reasons. And then at the same time, we saw a really big increase in our inbound call volumes for other reasons as well. But we needed to put the temp agent that we had for these outbound calls on the inbound call queue. So after all that time, effort, training, and building new processes for this new call, we had no one who could actually had the capacity to make the calls. So that is where we started working with Curious Thing. We were able to turn around a pilot within a couple of weeks to start internal testing. And we called our AI Kate. So meet Kate. I will refer to her as Kate throughout the presentation, but it means that I'm referring to our AI at Brighte. So the results speak for themselves. Compared to the connection rate of 30%, we have a connection rate of 81% with Curious Thing. So when we make a call through Kate, 81% of people will pick up that phone call. And of that 81% that pick up the phone call, 79% of them complete the phone call. We are able to get through 1,000 customers or more per week with not just 1 attempt, but 2 attempts. So if they don't pick up the first time, we call them back again. Kate calls them back again, and she'll speak to them the second time. If not, otherwise people can call back the number and speak to Kate at any time that suits them. So it really helps that they're not calling back us directly with our human team. So the team at Curious Thing has been really fantastic to work with, and the technology has come a really long way in 3 to 4 months that we've been working with them. We now have a premium voice. So you just heard the one there. It's got better from when we initially started it. So it sounds more and more like a real person, and you can pick from different voices that kind of fit your what you're going for. We can now schedule calls, how many calls we want to make at a time. So if we have our team in a meeting and we don't want any calls to be transferred, we can turn the Kate calls off completely. Or if we're having a really quiet inbound day, we can turn them up so we can get through more calls in that day, depending on the day that works for us. We have access to the reporting of the calls, so it's really easy to see, prior the humans were tagging it, the AI does it all automatically. We can access the recordings of the calls, and Curious Thing is working on a bunch of other things to make it even better. So now, instead of having the agents who are doing repetitive tasks that they find super unfulfilling, they now can focus on the problem-solving tasks where they can actually add real value, and it's enjoyable for them, because let's face it, most people don't enjoy doing repetitive tasks over and over. So our goal initially was really just to feel that we didn't have anyone to make these calls, but a really big side benefit of it was that we actually saved a whole lot of money in doing so. It's 5 times cheaper to make a call through Curious Thing than it was to have a human making those calls. So that was, as I said, it wasn't what we were looking for, but it was just a really big benefit that came with it. So there was...
We've got a question on there. I don't want to miss it. So Anthony was just wondering what drove the contact rate higher. So was it just the increase in attempts, or was there any other strategies used there?
So I think it's the increase in attempt, but it's also that an SMS goes prior to the phone call. It comes up as that it's come from Brighte, which when we SMS from our own systems, it doesn't say that. And we don't do SMSs. When you're making an outbound phone call, we don't normally send an SMS because it has to be manually sent each time. And even keeping on top of that for a human is a lot of effort and just not realistic. So Kate sends a text message, says, hey, it's Kate, the digital assistant from Brighte. I'm going to be calling you in the next few minutes to discuss. And then, it's a second attempt as well. So, not everyone picks up on that first attempt. And it's also the ability that they can call back and go through the AI experience. So there's kind of 3 different pieces to that.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, as I was saying earlier, that one of our values is be human. So as I said, we had a lot of internal pushback around that this is just a really bad idea. So therefore, in order to get the team on board, we did a couple of things. So we I opened up to anyone that wanted to be involved in the pilot testing, that they could come and do a call in our testing phase. So that worked really well because everyone who wanted to be a part of it got to be a part of it. They gave us feedback on what we could do better. We changed some of the things because of that. But it really meant that people could be a part of it and not feel like it was just some random project going on the side. So we then launched the pilot to a small number of real customers. And then once we were comfortable with that, we launched it to all customers. And then we looked at the data of about 4 weeks of the calls. So then I went to our all hands meeting that we do every week with the whole company. And what I did was, we normally ask for all our human new employees. They answer 4 questions about themselves and tell us a bit about themselves. So we worked with Curious Thing, and they put together a phone call where Kate answered all the questions, and she introduced herself to the team and said what coffee she likes and all these things. And it got some really great interaction from the rest of the team, and everyone was really on board with, that Kate's a new team member, and then along with that gave the statistics of the success we were having in the connection rate and things like that. And then since then, I've had a lot of other departments reach out and say, hey, could we use this? How can we use it? And we're in the process of working on some other calls that can work for some other departments. Was there another question? Oh no, that's maybe not.
Yes, we've got another question about another use case, which we'll pick up after the next little bit. No, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk to that as well, because we're in the process of working on a call like that. But yeah, I'll pass back to Emma.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Millie. Super interesting always for us as well to hear directly from our customers the insights. So the last point that Millie and I will both be speaking with you about is how we can address some of these legitimacy issues around outbound AI calls. So, and of course, we know that it's often a concern that people have, that you don't want to be reaching out to your customers and it to feel spammy or like a robocall. And how can we make it a really authentic and legitimate experience for all of your customers? So the most important points that we focus on here is that we want to build transparency and trust with your customers. And so, of course, the primary focus of this is to make sure that we have official communication from your organization to your customers. So this could be including mentioning the AI calls or the AI assistant on your website, in email communications, in marketing, or even just if your staff were to advise your customers directly that they are using an AI assistant, because of course that's the easiest way to increase legitimacy, that they know that it is coming from an authorized call from your organization. We also, as Millie mentioned, we send out an SMS beforehand, which can help confirm the source of the call. So what we do here is that we'll personalize the call. So we'll make sure that we use their first name. We'll mention the company's name that the call's coming from. And if there's any other relevant information that will help identify this message and this call coming from their account with that organization, we'll include that there as well, just to increase that legitimacy of the call. And then also in the call as well, we have the ability that if anyone is uncertain about where the call is coming from, we can reassure them that yes, this is an authorized call from your organization. And we can also drop in those pieces of information that are relevant for your customers. And one of the other points that we try to emphasize in our calls as well is that we want to really clearly communicate the value that we're bringing to your customers through this call. So of course you want to make sure that you have an existing relationship with the customer, so it's not the first time that they're hearing about your brand. So they have recognition with your brand, they're a customer of yours, and then this is one of the additional outbound capabilities that you can have to interact with your customers. And it can also be a really great way to have a point of differentiation in all of your touch points throughout the customer journey. So long as you're selecting those right points in your customer journey. So I'll pass over to Millie as well to touch on Brighte's experience with these legitimacy issues.
Awesome, thanks, Emma. So we launched an initial first call to do some testing that was slightly different to the call that we have today. On that initial first call, we did an ID process of the customer, asking them to confirm their date of birth and their finance amount that they had applied for. And we didn't offer them to speak to a human at all throughout that call. And we asked them to provide information, and we still had a completion rate of 60%. So the reasoning that the first call we had the ID process on there was because we were doing a bit of testing as well. We wanted to understand, could Curious Thing handle that for our more complex calls? Can it handle ID process that our humans would normally do? So that absolutely worked, and we still had that completion rate of 60%, which was pretty high considering that most people internally as well said, if you ask me to divulge sensitive information on an AI call, I won't. But the reality is the data shows a very different story, that they actually will. And like that was a 60% completion rate. Some of the other customers also got through most of the call. They just didn't do the whole call. So then we made some changes to the test call out because we decided we didn't need the ID call on that call. We use it on other calls that are for more sensitive information, but on this welcome call, we don't divulge sensitive information about the customer or ask them anything sensitive. So on the second call that we put out, which is what the data that I went through before is on, we offer them to speak to a customer, to a human upfront. So we say that if any time within the call, or Kate says it, I don't say it. If Kate says, if any time throughout this call, if you want to speak to a human, just say, I want to speak to a human. And only 10.6% of people asked to speak to a human. And that's out of the thousands of calls that we've done. So it was a lot lower than we expected. I thought that if we put that question in, it would actually mean that most people want to take it. But most people just want that assurance that if any point during the call that they decide that this is no longer working for them, that they can get to a human, and that reassures them enough. And then on the second call as well, we don't ask them to ID themselves, but we don't share any personal information. But we do ask them to confirm, am I speaking with Emma? So we don't do a last name, so that, you know, if they wanted to come back and ID through us, if we weren't actually speaking to Emma, if they wanted to come back and do the ID process on our phone call with our humans, that they wouldn't be able to pass it because we don't give the last name. And then we give them some other information like the company that they've probably got to install their solar panels or install their other products. And we give them what their finance amount is and ask them to confirm it. So we're giving them enough information for them to know that it must be us on the phone, so that they trust that it's us and that they can speak freely on that phone call. So that did see, when we provided more information, the completion rate went up to 79%. So Brighte isn't an early adopter of AI in Australia, but we do pride ourselves on protecting our customers' data and doing risk analysis to ensure that everything we do is in the best interest of our customer. So to get this through, I had to work very closely with our internal risk team to make sure that we weren't oversharing information, or oversharing what we're asking the customer on the call, and that the ID checks, if we were to do them, were passing successfully. But what we recognized in that analysis of the risk is that it's actually a much lower risk that the AI is going to divulge information than with a human, because the human can see the whole account, they can see everything, and they could be sidetracked by what the customer is asking, and they might actually share information accidentally that they're not meant to, where the AI can only ever share what you give it. So if we don't give the AI the last name, Kate's never going to accidentally say the last name. She's never going to accidentally share the email address because we don't provide that information. So that was where risk, it was actually that it was actually quite a low risk that we would ever have information we didn't want to be shared on that phone call. Yeah, that's everything from me.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Millie. So in summary today, the three things that we want everyone here today to be able to take away is, first of all, when you're be looking at the opportunities in your customer journey where there's either a pain point for your customer or something that you can really help elevate a particular touch point with a customer, whether it's an existing phone call or an existing outbound campaign that you want to replace or introduce something brand new. So first of all, understand your customer journey and where would be the best place to start introducing these type of AI calls. The second point is the scale that you can achieve with these calls. So again, as Millie was mentioning, since you can call out 1,000 people in a week, you're able to really scale your best human agents so that they're having important conversations, the problem-solving conversations with the customers that need it, and the repetitive conversations that are essential for the customer value, but aren't maybe the best use of a team's time. You can really make sure that the AI can scale those conversations and have a really consistent experience for everyone at that point in the journey. And the last takeaway is the learnings that you can get from an AI phone call. So because we're having open language conversations with all of your customers, you can have more conversations with your customers more often and then get very in-depth insights at scale so that you can understand your customers on the individual level and also overall trends. So thank you so much everyone for joining today. We really loved all of your participation and we really appreciate that everyone took the time out to speak with us today. So now we'll move over to the Q&A section. So I'll stop sharing my screen and then we can jump into some of the questions that were raised throughout today. If anyone thinks of any other questions, please feel free to share them in the Q&A section or in the chat.
So Emma, we do have a question around debt recovery calls and thinking about the accounts receivable or payment reminder, but then also age debt calls.
Yeah, definitely. So we work with a few of our customers around having these age debt calls, and part of it is when you're having any payment recovery conversation over the phone, you want to make sure that we understand what stage the customer is in their customer journey. So if it is a very old debt, then this might be the first communication that you've had with this customer for a while. And so we want to make sure that the communications that are going out to them beforehand and then also on the call itself is appropriate for the relationship that you currently have with the customer. What a lot of our customers have found really helpful when you're looking at age debt is because we can have as many calls as we want, depending on, of course, your own regulatory and risk around customer contacts throughout the week. You can contact any customers multiple times a day or multiple times a week until you achieve the outcome that you're hoping to, or you move them on to the next stage of your debt recovery process. So it's absolutely one of the use cases that we work with our financial services organizations.
Fantastic. And we've got another question here around data output. So what kind of data collection can we obtain on the calls, and how does that get, I guess, recorded and produced out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so in the Curious Thing dashboard, we provide high-level metrics and overview over the campaign's progress. So if you were to look at the entire cohort of customers, you can see, as Millie mentioned, the contact rates, the completion rates, and where anyone's dropping off in the conversation. So especially in the first few weeks of launching a campaign, we'll watch very closely to see what are the turns that people are having in the conversation, where are they dropping off, and what points in the journey can we improve a certain question or a certain part of the conversation to try to increase that engagement rate. So, so for our customer success team, we're really focused on making sure that the call itself is the best experience we can make it for your customers. So that's some of the overview insights. Some of the product development that Millie's been talking about is we're also going to start bringing in the high level question insights into the dashboard so that you'll be able to see at a high level, if I'm asking a feedback question to my customers, what are the general responses that are coming out of that? How can we look at the high level out of 1,000 conversations? What are people generally saying, and what are the trends in that data? So in terms of our actual platform, that's the high level overview of the data that we visualize for you. And then also we give you an in-depth export of the results. So every single customer record that you upload to the platform will give you the opportunity to download the in-depth results. So that so they will show the call outcomes, the verbatim full transcript, each point of the turn in the conversation, what the call outcome was, and the full audio recording as well, so that you can dive into any individual call. The other great thing that we also provide in the export is that you can also see that if there was anything that came up that a user requested or was a little bit out of expectation for the call, so that if anyone was to say, sorry, where are you calling from? Who is this? Is this a spam call? We will flag that so that your team will know that actually this person did have legitimacy issues, and you can follow up with them if you would like to. If anyone asks to speak to a human in the call at any point, on the call, we will transfer them through straight away if you would like to have that option, but we'll also flag that for you so that you know that that person did actually request to speak to a person. If someone doesn't understand the question, doesn't understand the language, if anyone uses strong language or it shows being upset or angry on the call, we'll also highlight that in the results and also handle it on the call live for you. So for most of our organizations, for any of these requests that come up, our default is let's transfer you through to a human so that we can recover this experience for you so that you can feel positive. And obviously with all of this, the great thing is that we actually see a very low rate of people ever having these types of issues arise, but it's just giving full transparency in terms of the entire conversation and anything that arose out of those calls.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for that one. A couple more have come through. So one is, does Curious Thing operate outside of Australia?
Yes, we absolutely do. So currently we are working in Australia, US, and in Singapore, and the Philippines, and very soon in Thailand. So we are always expanding our customer base across different countries. So, and again, we always say that if you are in a country where we currently don't support, we are always able to work on setting up any campaigns for your region or for where your customers are, because we also appreciate that that a lot of the time our organization, the company that we're working with might be in Australia, but they might need to call customers in New Zealand, in Australia, in different countries around the world.
Great. And then an obvious follow-on to that one, I'm just working through these. Multilingual, are there any other languages apart from English that we can hold conversations in?
So currently all of our calls are only in English, but that is absolutely in our product roadmap. So very soon we'll be able to support other languages so that we can have the calls in both ways to be able to understand what the customer is saying and then also to speak in that person's native language.
Oh, thanks. Now we do have another question here. What has been the real world experience with debt recovery AI applications? You've talked about customer journey, but I'm looking at customers who've been terminated or written off debt. So looking at the very end of that journey.
Could you repeat the question for me, Tennille?
Yeah, so it's looking at real world experience with debt recovery. We've talked about customer journey, but this particular question, the person who's looking at customers who've been terminated with written off debt. So looking at how would AI go engaging with people who've got written off debt and that sort of thing.
So in some cases, in some cases, it's the choice in the customer journey that you might not want to have an AI call at that point in the conversation, because if someone is not responding to your, not responding and they've gone to the point of writing off the debt, then there might be a point where an AI call might not be as successful as other means. One of the interesting things that we spoke about with one of our customers that's working in this space is that they use the AI calls with other communication channels, and by having that channel variety, that's been really helpful to increase the rate, because not everyone's going to answer a call, not everyone's going to answer an SMS, not everyone's going to answer an email, but having the combination of those as you're going through that debt recovery process, generally that will pick up the people that didn't fall into any of those individual categories. I hope that answers your question, and feel free to reach out to Tennille and I as well, and we can discuss this in more detail if you had any other questions.
Yeah, I think, Emma, you touched on two really good points there. One is that sometimes AI is not the best channel for some conversations, but it makes a great addition to complement other channels as well. So thinking about an overall interaction might be made up of multiple contact points, and AI can absolutely fit into some of those as well really well. I think that's all of the current questions. So I guess a bit of a last call for any questions if people wanted to pop them in or reach out in the chat as well. I guess we wait a couple of minutes. I'm not sure if Millie had anything else to add.
Yeah, I could touch on that. Yeah, we're looking at where we can use calls in conjunction with other things that we do, or using the calls as the first point of contact, and then that we're going to have other processes off that. But yeah, the welcome call that I talked about is just one of the calls we use. There is other calls that we're using. You know, we're doing one for a credit card reminder when a credit card's expired. It's just a courtesy call to say, hey, your credit card's about to expire. Do you have bank details that you could give us instead? Or give us a call back when you have your card, or for expired cards. Like there's different user cases that we're using, but we're trying to start looking at where in our journey makes sense. And some of them we've said, no, that doesn't make sense. But we're just looking at where it does make sense and what can bring us the most value for the customer as well. Like credit card reminder call from a human is probably a bit weird and a bit forceful. Like, I don't actually want to do this now, where the AI call is just like, hey, we're just letting you know your credit card's about to expire. And for me, I was like, that would be great, because I remember when my card expired and I couldn't even remember half the stuff that was on my card. So that kind of really adds value to the customer journey. And we weren't looking at that any other way at Brighte currently.
Thanks, Millie. Emma, we do have another question here that's just come in, talking about different types of customers. So do we hold calls or host calls with people who aren't customers? So thinking employees. Oh, that's a great question.
I'll also pass to you, Neil, as well to talk about this. So we absolutely do work with work internally in organizations for employee campaigns as well. So so for us, the way that we look at our calls is that if it's a conversation that you could potentially have with a human, then this is something that we can try to translate into an AI call. So for example, if you were to look at any feedback survey that you would have with a customer, absolutely valuable and important to be having those same conversations with your internal employees. So, so in terms of having information outreach and employee check-ins and feedback surveys and exit surveys as well, for example. So these can all come into the same employee journey in terms of onboarding, retention, and exiting the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to add to that, Emma, there's also a whole range of conversations that are not great with humans. So where people feel a little bit reluctant to be honest with a human, they're very, very happy to be incredibly honest and vulnerable with an AI. So thinking about exit interviews is a fantastic one. If somebody's employment experience hasn't necessarily been fantastic, they're really happy to be honest with an AI, whether that's through disclosed or undisclosed and unintentional anonymity. And then also in the health space, talking to people who maybe need some assistance with some health interventions and that sort of thing. We've done a lot of work in that space, supporting, so not clinical, but supporting people through a health journey, for example. We did a lot of work during COVID, speaking to people who had tested positive for COVID and that sort of thing. So yeah, so lots of different applications, not just traditional customers who are purchasing something, but any kind of relationship where you're providing a service to somebody. So that could be an employee, could be a patient, could be even in the fundraising space, talking to donors and supporters and that sort of thing. But anytime you've got information that you're wanting to collect or information that you're wanting to provide, that interaction can be really well facilitated through AI. And I don't think we have any more questions. I think there's a couple that come through that we've sort of covered off already. So I think that's back to you, Emma.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Neil. So I'll just add up here contact. If anyone here would like to reach out to us, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. We can book in a demo and have a conversation about where voice AI could be worked anywhere in your organization and customer journey. So please feel free to reach out to us at curiousing.io/demo. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We've really enjoyed this conversation with you all. And thank you to Millie from Brighte and also Barnage for working with us on this webinar. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll end the webinar here, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.